Welcome back to the Brojo Emotionally Shameless series. Today we're going to be talking about something that I guess is not strictly a single emotion, but a process of emotions, but one that a lot of people have shame about nonetheless, and that is grief. So grief is the natural state of processing loss, the process we go through to come to terms with something that we thought would be permanent being taken away from us. The death of a loved one, the end of a career. For some people, loss can even be a personal thing. Like I remember I went through grief when my identity was lost. So we can lose ourselves, we can lose others, we can lose things, we can lose pets. The things we love go away, change form in some way, and we process this so that we can handle the reality of life. Every single human culture, no matter how isolated the tribes were from each other, all created a ritual for processing death. It is in our DNA to grieve. We find a way to do it, a funeral process of some kind to deal with death and loss. So it's natural. It's very natural and normal for a human to grieve. And until we accept that, we will always suffer with our grief. There are even some primates who grieve. If you watch David Attenborough, BBC, there's, I think it's the Planet Earth series, or it might be the Life series. There's certain types of monkeys that when the leader dies, they all sit around picking the flies away from his corpse and kind of being very quiet and sad. It looks like a funeral, like a wake. Now, most people don't deal with grief very well, and I think that's why so many people are fucked up. They deal with it through avoidance. They use humor to pretend that they don't feel it. They use busyness to distract themselves from it. Or sugar and drug binging to avoid feeling it. Or even just avoiding talking about it, not expressing it in any way. And I believe this is what creates trauma. The reason we get traumatized by an event is because we don't process it properly at the time it occurs. You know, this is why it's so easy to be traumatized as a child. The adults in our lives are often incapable of helping us process something properly. And so we get frozen in time. Where the moment happened, we get frozen because we don't process it. And this is why we need to come to terms with grief, why we need to grieve regularly as life regularly changes. And we need to be shameless about it. Because if you avoid getting hurt, you're going to get traumatized. The painful emotions are evidence of caring, of appreciation, of connection. When you grieve for something, it means you loved that thing. Even if, say, I'm grieving, I'm traumatized because I was abused as a child. I haven't been, but say I was. I'm grieving for the boy I once was. You know, I'm grieving for him, the loss of him, his innocent self. You know, I loved him, and I'm grieving for him. So whenever you're grieving or processing trauma, it shows that you care and appreciate and love something. And this is natural, and it would be harmful to try and make that go away. It would also be, in a sense, disrespectful to the thing you've lost to not grieve. If you believed you loved something and yet you don't grieve for it, then you have to question whether or not you really loved it. Grief allows you to know for sure. You know, you might not tell someone you love them every day, but you bawl your eyes out at their funeral. You did love them. You know, it's proof there. Dr. Russ Harris, acceptance and commitment therapy. He's a GP, but he's one of the leading kind of figures of acceptance and commitment therapy. His work was very helpful to a friend of mine recently who lost a much beloved pet. And I asked my friend to give me some feedback on how he dealt with the grieving process. And he said Russ Harris advises us to take an attitude of curiosity and mindfulness with respect to the painful emotions that show up. So what he's talking about here is when you are grieving is to simply sit back, create room for that to exist, that feeling, to pay attention to it rather than try to get away from it. Go into it. What is this feeling? Why do I feel it? Where does it hurt? What does my mind tell me about this pain? Observing painful feelings, allowing them to occur, is an expression of kindness towards yourself. And so if you're kind towards yourself, you're allowing yourself to understand that the reason you're grieving is because you're hurt, not because they're gone. You're the one who needs the support. You know, they're done already. Byron Katie is one of my favorite influencers for this kind of process. You can look her up on YouTube. She does a piece of work called The Work, and it's a 4-step process for dealing with anything painful. And, her philosophy is that there is no such thing as death, that death is an illusion in our mind, that things simply transform, they change. And I believe this as well. I don't believe something can die because nothing can leave the universe. It simply changes shape. The energy transitions from one structure to another. And if something still exists in your mind, then it's never really gone. So what Byron Katie will talk about when it comes to grieving is you might grieve, say I'm a mother and I've lost my child. I might grieve for the lost child. And yet that child being dead is no different to the child being in another room where I can't see it. It still exists in my mind. The relationship with my child's all in my mind. Whether they're upstairs in their bedroom or in a coffin, the relationship is unchanged by that situation. So when somebody dies, they don't actually leave you as long as they remain in here, because that's the only place they've ever been, because the only place you ever are is in here. All this external world is just a hallucination created by your mind. It's your mind perceiving signals from the brain and creating a hallucination. So everything inside your mind is reality. Reality is entirely inside your mind, which means every relationship connection you have is in there, which means it can't be taken away until you die. So grieving is also part of understanding that you've never really lost something. It's just changed form in a way that affects your life. Dr. Russ Harris also talks about dropping the anchor. This was particularly helpful for my friend who was grieving for his pet. And it's when you notice that, this is what my friend says, notice that you're caught in the smog of your mind and emotions, and in the space of 10 to 20 seconds, push your feet into the ground, take a deep breath, and notice 5 things you can see, 5 things you can hear. So this is a little process to get you present. When you get lost in your grief, when you're miles away from reality, you just push your feet into the ground. You can feel the gravity pulling you in. You can feel the solidness of the ground. And you look around, you count 5 things in the room. There's a poster, there's a door handle, there's a curtain. And I can't do that without being present. What can I hear? I can hear the leaves, I can hear the construction workers outside. As soon as I do that, I become present. I'm not trying to get away from the emotions. I'm just trying to be with them here and now rather than the fantasy disaster that they create in my mind. Grief takes time to resolve, so you're just going to have to allow it to take its time. Don't try to rush it. Any attempt to rush grief is usually an avoidance. So just let it be. Let it take as long as it takes. It'll probably take longer than you want it to. But the better you are with allowing it to take its time, the better you'll be with dealing with loss in the future. Now, the last point I want to make is one for myself. One reason that I feel I am capable of grieving for death and loss quite effectively is because I spent a lot of my childhood on a farm. And on a farm, things die. So horses die, cows die, my pet goat died, I had 3 or 4 dogs, they died. I wasn't like going around killing them or anything, it's just, on a farm, you get to see the life cycle of other animals and it's quicker than your own. And things die in childbirth and, things die a lot. And so you get used to it, you come to accept that you will die and everything dies and it's normal. Whereas I imagine, say, somebody raised in a city, they don't get to see death very much. And so when it hits them hard. But I saw a lot of death when I was growing up. I had a couple of friends die while I was still in high school. And one person commit suicide. And I got exposed to death and loss a lot. So I got to practice grieving before I'd become too psychologically fucked up to emotionally experience it. Most people, they don't get their first big grief until they get older. When they relive a trauma from childhood or when something goes wrong finally for the first time. And they're unpracticed, they're fragile about it. So what I'd recommend is to try and put yourself in a position where you can become familiar with loss. There's a lot of ways to do this. Starting a business is a good way to do this. You're going to lose clients, you're going to lose money, you're going to lose a lot of stuff, you're going to lose yourself as an identity. There's a few sort of books and movies, where the lead character dies, getting used to your favorite. Game of Thrones is great for this. Your favorite person just keeps dying, Wilbur Smith books. They're very harsh and real, fictional books, but his earlier stuff from the sort of 1600s and such, it's just people just dying all the time. They die of illness, they die from battle, your heroes die. Allow yourself to get used to the fact that things are going to go, and allow yourself to practice grieving in small, piecemeal bites so that you can get used to it when it happens in the bigger circumstances. So grief is normal. It's good to feel sad for something. It means that you cared about it. It means you're real, human. You feel something. You're alive. It's a process that allows you to get through loss so that you can move on quicker. Hope that helps you all. Grief is a tough one. It's a range of emotions. And like I said, I recommend Dr. Russ Harris and Byron Katie as excellent resources if you're looking to process grief more healthily. And I'll see you guys next time.